What's up, Flannelverse? It is time for the final multi-game slate of the entire NFL season. After this one, all we've got is the Super Bowl slate. I'm excited to be here with my guest, Jake Tribbey, and I do apologize for us running a little bit late. I sent Jake the link to this after the show was supposed to start, and then he had some technical difficulties, so we were delayed a little bit. But now I think that we are ready to go. Jake, how are you feeling about this slate? Are you ready to talk about it?
Yeah, I feel very ready to talk about it. I haven't looked at Showdown pricing much, but I feel pretty good about the stance that I plan on taking here on the 2-game slate. I also just think this is like one of the best days for football of the entire year. I mean, 4 great teams left, 2 awesome games. 2-game slates aren't generally my favorite, but for a slate like this, I still think we can have plenty of fun with it and find some great angles here. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this slate today.
Yeah, you're right. Just from like a watching football perspective, like this is as fun as it gets because this is like the highest. I mean, obviously the Super Bowl is the actual highest stakes, but feels like pretty close to the Super Bowl because you need to get through this to get to the Super Bowl. You get 2 games. Yep. It's a lot of fun. I'm excited for this slate. It's also kind of a strange slate in that we have 3 rushing quarterbacks, plus Patrick Mahomes, who runs a little bit more when his team needs him to. And then we have Bills and Chiefs on the slate, who both just like super flat usage of their players. I don't know. It'll be an interesting one to talk about, but we will get into it. As usual, we're going to go position by position, starting with quarterbacks, then running backs, receivers, tight ends, defenses. I mean, maybe we'll talk about defense kickers. That's kind of more for the showdown slates. But we'll play around with some lineups. We're going to start by going through the 2-game slate, looking at the ownership there as we go through all the usage and matchup trends. And then after that, we'll take a brief look at Showdown. Honestly, I haven't given much. I've looked at the Showdown stuff a little bit because I do a little bit of content on it for Roto Grinders, but haven't dug in that deep. I do have seen some things that I like in the Showdown slates, but it's pretty easy. Once you've gone through all of the usage and matchup stuff, it's pretty easy to find plays that you like on the Showdown slates also. So again, we are going to Chokehold says Eagles center is out. Is that official? I saw that he was questionable earlier in the day. Yep. Cam Jurgens won't play in conference championship. I really don't know what to make of that exactly. Seems like he's been doing pretty well.
I can't imagine that would impact the tush push much at all, considering we just saw them go from Kelce to this guy.
Right.
And it really didn't impact things. Like, I'm sure the backup center practices that all the time.
True.
So I don't think I would prescribe much meaning to that, but I wouldn't fault if someone's a true ball knower and they think they know better than me. I wouldn't fault you for it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because he's new this year, and also we've got the Jalen Hurts injury. Like, I wonder if that's going to affect the tush push at all. A lot of stuff that's sort of hard to know before the game start, and then the Eagles game is going to start, and it's going to be like Jalen Hurts looks totally fine, or he looks like sort of like he's limping out there, and no way he could actually do a tush push. I don't know. It's kind of hard to know ahead of time.
Whatever you guess will happen, the opposite will happen. So just mentally prepare yourself for that.
Yeah. Who am says Jalen is also wearing a leg brace, right? I think so. I believe that is the case. I guess maybe we'll see some pregame. This is the first game, so maybe we'll see some pregame warmups. Let us know if anybody's watching. Let us know how Jalen Hurts looks, because that might change things a little bit. But we'll start there. We'll start with the quarterbacks and fairly flat ownership for a 2-gamer. We've got Mahomes coming in at actually the most ownership at 38%. Roto Grinders has him at. He is the cheapest of the quarterbacks on this slate. Wait, do I have? Yeah, this is DraftKings. I saw the $5,000 or $500 incremental pricing and thought for a second that I was on FanDuel, but no, it is $6,000 for Mahomes, $6,500 for Hurts, $7,000 for Jayden Daniels, and $7,500 for Josh Allen. I'm going to sort. Well, no, I'll keep it like this. We have it sorted currently by salary. Jayden Daniels actually projecting better than Josh Allen at Roto Grinders. Maybe let's compare to the fantasy points data here. Also the projections here. So fantasy points has a dead tie, 22.9 for both Josh Allen and Jayden Daniels. Then Patrick Mahomes, then Jalen Hurts in the projections. So yeah, not pretty close in terms of the projections for Allen and Daniels, but then Hurts projecting 3 points better than Mahomes at Rotogrinders, whereas Fantasy Points has Mahomes projecting slightly better than Hurts. So that's sort of interesting seeing the discrepancies in the projections. But let's talk through it from an ownership perspective. So starting with the chalk, Mahomes at 38%. To me, Jake, that just seems like too much. Like, no way should Patrick Mahomes be the chalkiest quarterback on this slate. Do you agree with me there?
Yeah, totally agree with you. I think to me, like the way I was viewing quarterback coming into this slate was that, look, all these guys are amazing quarterbacks, both for fantasy and real life. So it's pretty easy to make an argument that any individual quarterback on this slate could go off, have a monster game. And yeah, I mean, with Mahomes pulling the most ownership, especially given how spread out this offense has been. I mean, obviously things, have condensed a little bit more in the playoffs, but still, I really like the idea of leaning into guys like Josh Allen, Jayden Daniels, mostly just because of the ownership angle. And I think especially with Allen, people are going to be so freaked out about who do I stack him with? Making a Josh Allen double stack is so difficult. And they're probably just going to stay away. And I mean, we know out of every quarterback on the slate, he's probably the most likely to go for 45 DraftKings points. Also, like, salary is really not much of a consideration here. Saquon Barkley, we're going to talk about running back here shortly, but Saquon Barkley's projecting for 90 to 100% ownership, depending on where you look, which is absolutely insane. And that's because salary just isn't a concern, and every single lineup you make effectively can pay up for Saquon Barkley here. So I really wouldn't, sweat the salary savings that you're getting from playing a guy like Mahomes. That's sort of the way that I'm looking at this slate, and it does look like I'll end up with more Jayden and Josh Allen than anybody else.
Yeah. Oh, same. We're seeing some notes on Josh Allen and Daniels providing a couple. He says the reason you're seeing so much Mahomes is Sims Optos, in my opinion, is the median projections. Allen 22.5 is insulting. You give Allen a 25, 26, and the bill is going to change a lot. Yeah, obviously. And then he says, for what it's worth, Allen's last 6 versus Kansas City, 24.98, 30.64. He's got an asterisk there. 21.52. I mean, yeah, he puts up a lot of fantasy points against the Chiefs, as you would expect, because they're going to push him. And he's just Superman out there. Josh Allen puts up as many fantasy points as he needs to, or puts up as many points as he needs to help his team win. So not a surprise that he puts up a ton of fantasy points, typically against Kansas City. So yeah, we are in agreement. Like, the Mahomes ownership here, that's just too much. Maybe we'll have to look at other places. I think he was the chalkiest when I started doing content a few days ago for this slate. He was the chalkiest elsewhere, but maybe by a little bit less than Rotogrinders has it. 38% higher than I've seen.
Yeah, I'm looking at a few other sites. I'm seeing Mahomes the highest as well. Mahomes, Daniels, Hurts, Allen in that order. Let's see.
Oh, actually, I'm seeing him. Some places have him even higher in terms of ownership. That's kind of nuts.
That would be a little surprising to me, just because, like I said, like, salary does not mean much on this slate. So I really don't think people are going to feel pressured to get down to Mahomes, but this is interesting. It might be one of those spots where, optos are pushing you toward a little Mahomes, and everyone sort of sees that and backs off a bit. I still expect him to be the highest owned, but I'm not sure he'll come in. I mean, I've seen 35%, 40% in a couple spots, which doesn't quite seem right.
I have also, and yeah, I mean, at that point, I'll be half the field, if that, on Mahomes. Like, it just, as you said, you don't really need the salary savings. All right, so let's talk about some of the quarterbacks that we do like a little bit better. So Mahomes getting the 38%. Josh Allen is Rotogrinders has him at 25% for Josh Allen. I think I still like him there. I've seen him even lower than that, which to me is kind of nuts for a guy who put up back-to-back weeks of like 54 and then 45 or something ridiculous like that fantasy points late in the year. He's averaged like 29 fantasy points since their bye. Just insane, the production for Josh Allen. So let's start there. I mean, he is the most expensive. So if you have any concerns about salary, I guess he is the one that you would have to worry about the most. And we do have 2 other, good rushing quarterbacks on the slate. But to me, Josh Allen kind of stands out as probably my favorite quarterback on the slate. Are you with me on that? How do you feel about Josh Allen?
Yeah, I'm right there with you on that. I've got, looking at my current sort of Fantasy Labs beta-ish build for my lineups, I've got like 41% Allen, 38% Jayden, and then a bit of a drop off before I get to Mahomes and Hurts. I think with all these guys, obviously we're going to see them run a little bit more, put, everything out on the line. But I just feel like with Josh Allen, he's going to do that, times 2 or times 3, right? Compared to some of these other guys. I mean, we know he can go superhero mode. And if there was ever a game for it, I mean, it would be right here. So I really like leaning into Josh Allen. And I mean, in terms of just like I really don't buy into these narratives a ton, but for some of these smaller slates where we are looking for more niche edges, I do think you can give it some consideration. I mean, in terms of like a legacy game for Josh Allen, this is the spot for it, right? Like you lose to Mahomes again here, I think everyone's going to say like, all right, he's probably never getting it done at this point. So yeah, this could be, this just could be an absolutely monster game for Allen. And man, it gets me really excited, thinking about the way this game could play out just from a watching football perspective and from a fantasy one too. But I think we're both in alignment here. The other tough thing with a slate like this is all the defenses are pretty good. So there aren't really a ton of strong matchup angles for these kind of slates, which is tough.
Yeah, I was going to say like you start talking about like the narratives here, and a lot of the time, like throughout the season, I'll be like, I'm not going to factor that in. Like we have so much to consider outside of that, and then you get to these types of slates, and like you said, like the matchups are tough across the board, more like pretty close to across the board. Like nobody has a great matchup almost anywhere on the entire slate. And they're all like good offenses. And so it's really hard to find reasons to differentiate. And so it does become more like, all right, so all of the like hard and fast, like the actual data that you can like lean into is like, doesn't really give you that much in terms of like, oh, this guy looks so much better than that player, based on the matchup data, based on the usage trends, whatever. So then you start being like, all right, so what other edges can I find? And like narratives, honestly, like I start to think about them more as we get deeper into the season like this, as we get into these slates where it is just harder to find data edges.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely don't mind that as an angle. I think the best angle for this slate, and something that we should sort of hammer as we talk about these guys, lineup construction is going to be your best edge by far, way better than player takes. I had several people reach out to me this week asking, oh, is there going to be a DFS article this week? An overarching slate breakdown. Are you doing anything? Is Scott doing anything? And I was like, no, largely because the angles or the edges that you can get on individual player takes this week just isn't that strong. We've had about 20 weeks of football so far. All the sites know what they're doing. Everybody has really strong projections for these guys at this point. There aren't really many injury question marks. How you build your teams is a lot more important than the stance you're taking on individual players. So I think maybe as opposed to talking about, as much the merits of individual quarterbacks, we should be talking about how we want to build our lineups around those specific quarterbacks. For a guy like Josh Allen, I'm really leaning into Amari Cooper, Keon Coleman, as I think those are guys who can catch long touchdowns and no one really wants to play them. Another guy that I really like, and we'll talk about him a little bit more when we get to running backs here, Ty Johnson, regular season average depth of target, 8 yards downfield. I mean, this guy, like, he runs legit receiver routes. Touchdown equity obviously isn't quite there with James Cook soaking up most of the inside the 20 stuff. But especially if this game turns into a shootout, you could see 12 to 15 points from Ty Johnson, which could absolutely get you there on a slate like this. So those are sort of my favorite angles. I am playing a lot of Josh Allen, but I'm really jamming in a lot more, Keon Coleman, Amari Cooper, guys like that. And yeah, I think that's the thing you want to be the most mindful of on a 2-game slate like this is how you're stacking your teams up, how your overall lineup construction looks.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. We'll have to figure out how we want to actually stack the quarterbacks, and I think those are some good ideas. Good point from Ryan Heath here. Says, what about the Chiefs referee narratives? How can we take advantage of this? That's a good point. I mean, you play more Chiefs, I guess, right? That's how you take advantage of the Chiefs. No, you play more Chiefs running backs because it's going to be pass interference in the end zone over and over, and then the Chiefs running backs rush it in. I guess
that would probably be the best angle. Chiefs defense would also benefit significantly from the Chiefs refs narrative. Those would probably be the bigger ones. It would, if you did believe in that, you would have to dock Mahomes' projection a little bit though, right? Because of the point you made, those roughing the passer, pass interferences, those wouldn't score you any fantasy points.
That's true. Yeah, it's a dock to Mahomes.
Yeah, or maybe you just bet Chiefs money line. That might be the best way to take advantage.
That probably is actually. So from a data perspective, one angle that we can find here is for Josh Allen, Chiefs have given up the third most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game on the ground to quarterbacks over the past 5 weeks, 3.4 fantasy points over expectation over the past 5 weeks. So that's kind of a positive for Josh Allen if you want to lean into that. Overall, also not a bad matchup. They've also given up 3.3 over expected through the air. So the Chiefs defense has been giving up fantasy points at least over the past 5 weeks. But so I have sorted now by schedule adjusted over the past 5 weeks for total fantasy points to quarterbacks, and it is bleak here. You get, the Bills obviously pretty high up here, but then you got to scroll all the way down here to the Chiefs, Commanders, Eagles, bottom of the barrel, like just tough matchups for these quarterbacks. All right, well, let's not spend much more time on quarterback because it is kind of the least interesting position to talk about to some extent. So we both think that Mahomes is going over-owned, Allen going a little bit under-owned. Sounded like you like Daniels a little bit better than Hurts.
Yeah, I would. Part of that is just because Washington's throwing a bit more. I mean, both of these teams are very capable of, very long sustained drives where they're going for it on fourth down. So obviously easy to see the game playing slow in that sense. I think the big difference is that if that game does play slow, Philadelphia is going to throw the ball about 45% of the time. Washington will be closer to, say, 60%, which is a big part of why our Jayden Daniels projection is a bit stronger there. Also, Daniels has just been a better fantasy asset, especially if you rule out those 4 or 5 weeks where he was dealing with the rib injury. He's just been incredible. So yeah, certainly like him a bit more. Granted, the matchup would be a bit worse if you're being nitpicky, but man, I really like Jayden Daniels.
LNS says Bill's safety wrap out. Is that official? I thought I had seen like he was still questionable. We had Matt Milano, I think, was on the several Bills on the injury reports. That's the later game, so I guess I was assuming that info, that news would not come out until later, but maybe some of it's out and I missed it.
Yeah, he is ruled out. Taylor Rapp is.
Interesting. Okay,
so that would be worth a little bit to Mahomes. Obviously, like stuff like that across the industry is going to be factored into projection. So similar to weather, I wouldn't want to double count, safety being out, any more than what, we're doing or Roto Grinders is doing or any of the other sites.
Yeah. Still good note. Appreciate shedding that out. Anything else on the quarterbacks, or should we move on and talk about running backs?
No, I just pulled up our running back projections, and these are hilarious, man. I mean, we have Saquon for almost 26 points, and next closest is James Cook at 13, and then it's single digits for everybody. Yeah, this is why I mentioned at the top of the show we're going to see insane Saquon Barkley ownership on this slate, and it's because at least at fantasy points he is the only running back projecting for more than 13.5 fantasy points. Almost at 26, which is insane. I believe we're, right there is the highest in the industry, which makes me even more uneasy about what I'm about to say, which is that the easiest way to get different on this slate, obviously, is just fading Saquon Barkley in some capacity. Even playing, if you're doing a 150 set, playing 60% Saquon Barkley is a massive fade. And you're going to get really, really different here. And the thing with that is, it's really scary. Again, I love our projections. I love what Chris Wecht has done with them. A 26-point projection is probably the highest projection we've had for any running back all year, or right there as it. But Barkley's had some bad games this season. I mean, I remember the one that really sticks out to me is, I think it was week 9, week 10 against Dallas. Philadelphia blows out Dallas. I drafted Saquon in cage match. He gets benched at the end of the third quarter. Obviously something like that wouldn't happen in a playoff game, but still he only scored about 7 or 8 fantasy points in the 3 quarters that he did play. I pulled up his game logs here. A game with 7, game with 8.5, a game with 9.5. So Saquon Barkley's incredible. We all know that, right? But he's not infallible. And I do think, especially in smaller field, 95% ownership is really tough to swallow for me. I don't know how different I'm going to get off that right now. And in like my 150 set, I think I've got about 70% Barkley, which I feel okay about. The tough thing is you kind of need to make a bull case for some of these other running backs because you need to play 2 in your lineup, and that's tough. There are guys that I like, but it's hard to say I like anybody more than Saquon Barkley, right? So I'm curious where you're at the running back position. To me, I think the guys who stand out the most as guys I'm going to be taking some stands on are Brian Robinson and Ty Johnson. Obviously, already mentioned Ty Johnson, receiving threat, really like him paired with Josh Allen. Brian Robinson is seeing really strong usage, and especially if this game plays slow, the spread would sort of indicate more of an Austin Eckler game, but especially if the game plays slow, we should get a decent amount of B-Rob. And we saw, shootout last week. Brian Robinson had a great game. He scored 19 or 20 fantasy points. He was one of my biggest stands in the divisional round, and that ended up working out pretty well for me. So I'm happy to run it back this week because I do think he's being a little bit undervalued in our projections. I know I debated it heavily with Chris Wecht last week, the Brian Robinson versus Eckler projection from a median perspective,
Yeah.
really, really hard to push Robinson up past Eckler. But that's something that I've done in my own builds where I sort of just swapped their projections. I think I bumped Robinson up to like 9.5 and Eckler down to 8.5. And that's sort of how I'm optimizing. And I'm getting builds that I certainly like with that setting change.
Nice. Well, let's talk about Saquon first, and then let's separate. Like maybe we'll just go team by team would be easiest here. Because Saquon, I feel like is such like his own entity. Like you said, he's nearly double the projection of any other running back on the slate. Roto Grinders has him at 85% projected ownership. This would be for large field, and they actually have it flatter in terms of the projection. I mean. So Fantasy Points has it Saquon Barkley 25.8, James Cook 13.2, and then all the way down to Eckler 9.1, the third best. RotoGrinders has it a bit flatter. They have it 21.8 for Saquon, 14.3 for Cook, 14 for Robinson, 13.8, like much flatter in terms of the projection for the running backs.
Yeah. Also interesting, they're much more aggressive on both the Washington backfield and the Kansas City backfield than we are. Yeah, I think Kansas City especially has been just so spread out. You know, Kareem Hunt's getting the touchdown work, but starting with Saquon, I mean, on paper, this looks like, I mean, easily the best running back play of the slate. Washington is a major run funnel, and obviously that's what Philadelphia wants to do. They want to run the ball, and I think Washington, their pass rate over expectation allowed is like -6%. Pretty easily the biggest run funnel in the NFL. Obviously, we know Saquon Barkley has been incredible. If you've watched any NFL all year, you've seen it on your screen. It shows in the statistics. He's averaging almost 6 yards per carry, if I remember correctly. He's been awesome. Like I said, I think the one hole that you can poke here is that, there are certain games, say Washington gets out to a 17-3 lead. I mean, Saquon will be out there. He'll be catching passes. He is playing more. He's earning a higher percentage of backfield XFP in the playoffs than he was in the regular season. He was at about 78% regular season. In the playoffs, it's been about 92%, which for a guy who is as hyper efficient as Saquon is a notable bump. But that said, Washington gets out to an early lead here, or Jalen Hurts steals multiple touchdowns via the tush push. Barkley might only end up scoring, 10 points, 15 points. And in that case, that really does open the door for, a Kareem Hunt, a Brian Robinson, an Eckler, a James Cook, to maybe get you there over a Saquon. So really hard to poke holes in a guy like Saquon, but it does feel to me like 90% ownership is just a bit too much, especially in larger field stuff. I really want to come down there. Single entry, I can't fault you for playing him.
So I think ultimately, and I've pulled up schedule adjust. So this is over the past 5 weeks, a little bit better for Washington. Like they've actually been a tougher matchup for running backs over the past 5 weeks, although that's mostly through the air. They've actually been slightly below average on the ground versus running backs, which Saquon does more of his damage on the ground. But it's at least worth looking at the matchup data there. But yeah, it's a tough call with Saquon. I think playing large fields, I am going to play about 70% Saquon. And if he ends up at 90%, like I'd be happy to be under the field at 90%. If he somehow comes in at 60%, then I'd be happy to be over the field. Like I think 70% feels maybe, I mean, that's probably even light, like relative to efficient, like maybe 75, 80% is efficient would be the better number. But I think I'm probably just going to play like 75% Saquon, and I'll have outs if he gets hurt or just happens to have a floor game. I will say, like you're talking about, like if he scores 10 to 15 points, if he scores 15 points on this slate, I think there's a pretty good chance that he's optimal. At that, just because we have so many value options on the slate, and so like the running back options are so poor on this slate. And again, the projections look much better at Roto Grinders than they do at Fantasy Points, but still, like, who do you really feel confident in on this slate? Like, I'm not confident that we're going to have 2 running backs in double digits. Like, I think probably we are, but I'm not like, I wouldn't make a huge bet on like there are going to be multiple running backs who score double digit fantasy points on this slate. That's the level of running back expectations on this slate. So Saquon just like being very likely to score at least 12. That would probably be enough. And then he's also like a pretty good chance that he just separates completely and puts up 25 and like just, crushes the rest of the slate. So
yeah, I think probably like one of the more productive things we could talk about here is if you're not playing Saquon, what are some of the best ways to handle that in your lineup? I think obviously boosting guys like Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown makes a lot of sense because of Philadelphia's scoring, and it's not Saquon. It's probably going to be those guys. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that is right. I mean, it could just be that they're having trouble scoring in general, but I like that
Yeah.
idea of giving boost to the passing game, just assuming that they have more success there. Gainwell also is another, like, if you want to play it through Saquon gets hurt or something, then Gainwell obviously would benefit there. He also has some standalone value. We saw it last week. I know Christy was in chat talking about playing some Gainwell, and he, he got a little bit of run. I was concerned that, like, maybe in the playoffs he would get virtually zero run, but he did end up getting some run there. Actually, let's pull up the playoff rounds here. Just look at the usage for Gainwell in the playoffs, but he's somebody that, like, some standalone value, which I don't usually play, like, 2-game slates players that have very, very little standalone value, but I think Gainwell makes some sense because he has a little bit of standalone value, and then he also has obviously big contingent upside. So far in 2 playoff games, I guess just four carries and 1 target. So it felt like more than that to me. But yeah, not much usage for Kenneth Gainwell. I don't know, but he's somebody, if you are fading Saquon, you could consider him at least. I don't know that I would ever play them together. I think that would be like, I don't usually set a ton of rules to, like, rule out certain builds, but I feel like that's one that you could set, is don't play Saquon and Kenneth Gainwell together. I still honestly, I still don't think I would set the rule because I think that there is some possibility that, like, Saquon puts up 12 in the first quarter and a half and then gets hurt, and, like, that might be enough. So I still don't think I would set that rule. But that's one. I don't know. Would you set a rule like would you consider setting a don't have Saquon and Kenneth Gainwell in the same lineup rule?
I don't know. I think I would. The only scenario that I'd be worried about would be either, I mean, like an extreme blowout or Saquon getting hurt later in the game. You could see a scenario where maybe Saquon gets his 20 and then Gainwell gets another 8 to 12.
Yep.
That could maybe get you there. Yeah, that's a tough one for me. I don't know if I'd fully rule it out, but I probably wouldn't want that on more than 1 team, 2 teams in like a 150 set.
Yeah, it'd be something like if your optimizer gives you the opportunity to boost, like maybe give a negative boost to playing them together, but don't completely rule it out, is something that I would consider doing. Danny says making 150 without Saquon. I don't hate it. Like, if you just want to take a massive stand, it's very dangerous. You're pretty likely to get $0 back, or like close to $0 back.
Yeah.
But also that's kind of stand. Like, if you're being reasonable with your bankroll management, I don't hate that as a stand. Obviously, like I said, not the stand that I'm taking. I'm probably going to be a little bit light the field, but I still don't even know that I should be. Like, it's just he is. This is a gross running back slate. So yeah, I think I'm shooting for 70-75% Saquon in non-Saquon lineups. I do think having a little bit more Gainwell makes sense. Just bet on, just he happens to come in at the goal line for whatever reason, scores a random touchdown, or I guess not at the goal line. You probably want it from the 3 if they're still capable of doing the tush push today. But I think that there are ways for Gainwell to, he obviously has negative correlation with Saquon, so I think that's one way to do it. Like you said, playing it through the passing game makes some sense. Let's talk about, so you sounded like you wanted to talk about the Washington running backs. So let's talk about those, Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler. And I can pull up, here is the Commanders in the playoffs so far. 2 games. We have Brian Robinson, 25 carries to Austin Eckler's 14. Brian Robinson, 5 targets to Austin Eckler's 8. Eckler also running more routes, 41.6% to Brian Robinson's 27.3%. If they're playing from behind, would you expect Eckler to take on a bigger workload and look a little bit better?
Yeah, I definitely would. I would say though that I still think they'll favor B-Rob inside the 5, inside the 10, unless it is more of a hurry up type situation. So I think B-Rob's touchdown equity here is pretty strong, and it's not like he's a total non-factor here in the receiving game either. It does sort of seem like he's their preferred running back at this point. I can't really fault you for playing either guy. I totally understand where Chris is coming from. I do think in most scenarios, Eckler has a slightly better median. But when you're talking about who's more likely to score you 20 points, I really do think that's Brian Robinson.
Yeah, I think that is probably true. I like Eckler better on like PPR sites than half PPR. I'll say that because I think that there's just some possibility that he gets 5 receptions in this game.
Yeah.
I also like, I don't know, you say that the likelihood of getting 20, but like it's pretty likely that nobody gets 20 on this slate. So like,
Yes.
do we like how much we need to factor then? Like what is likelihood of hitting 20? I agree with you that Robinson's more likely to get 20, but I guess the question is how much more likely is Robinson to get 12 than Austin Eckler? And I feel like he is more likely, but it's not that much. And I think that that's really the question on this slate, because I don't think it's all that likely that either of them scores 20. Obviously, like that is a possibility. Like I'm not saying like there's no chance. There's probably a 5%, 10% chance that one of the Washington backs gets 20, and it would be more likely to be Robinson.
Yeah, I'm probably right there with you. And we also have to think about how these guys would compare to the Kareem Hunts, the Pachecos of the world, stuff like that. I like B-Rob the most out of that group between Washington running backs, Chiefs running backs.
Okay.
And then there's sort of that weird middle tier with only James Cook and really no one else. I mean, this is just a very strange running back slate.
Yeah. So, okay, let's do that as a group. I like that because you're right that it is kind of the Commanders and Chiefs is like a big, ugly glob of like, who do you want to play from these running backs? I think that I'm with you on, well, let's take a look at the ownership. So we have B-Rob coming in at 27% ownership, Eckler at 29%. That's kind of interesting that he's getting more. Pacheco at 18.5 and Kareem Hunt at 30. So Hunt getting the most. Yeah, I don't know. All right, let's take a look. So we have 2 games in the playoffs of, maybe I need to look at more than just the playoffs. Let me pull up the full game log here.
Yeah, so I know my note was that, Hunt had 4 out of 5 inside the 10 snaps last week, and I really think that's most of what this backfield offers at this point. Neither Hunt nor Pacheco has been efficient at all.
No,
so Pacheco has returned from injury. Yeah, it's been really bad. I think I'd rather just take the guy who has the best touchdown equity in both backfields. And, obviously Washington, that'd be B-Rob, and, even more clearly in Kansas City, that would be Kareem Hunt, as gross as he's looked. Maybe I was kind of hoping last week that, maybe Pacheco could get a bigger workload coming out of the bye, maybe look a little more healthy, but it just really didn't seem to unfold that way. I've sort of lost faith that he can be a bell cow at any point in the playoffs. Maybe I'll get a little more hopium for the Super Bowl if he gets a little bit of extra rest, but I do worry that broken leg's just holding him back.
Yeah, seems to be. Man, this is gross. I'm looking through the game logs here of, I have this sorted by the weeks for the Chiefs. Just looking at expected fantasy points, and it's like 8.3 last week for Hunt, 4.6 for Pacheco, and then the week prior to that, 6. I guess this is week 18, which doesn't really count. But we go back a little bit, and it's 11.6 for Hunt in week 17. I assume this is Pacheco at 9.3. Just like nobody ever has more than, I guess. Okay, so Kareem Hunt, this is back in week 12. Expected 19.5 fantasy points. But in general, just like since Pacheco is back, neither of them is getting to a ton of expected fantasy points, which, to your point, just means like you probably need touchdowns for these guys to get there.
Yeah. There's also Pirine. Samaje Pirine is involved. Doesn't seem like their role is good enough for me to justifiably play him on this 2-game slate. What do you think there? To me, he's probably more of a showdown play.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. We haven't seen the Chiefs from behind all that often. Now I'm curious, like, I'm not going to pull it up. We could look up in the data suite, like what his like snap count is and his usage is when the Chiefs are trailing, which would be a smaller sample size this year. But yeah, I think he's probably, I agree with you, more of a showdown play. Now, again, I don't think that he's a crazy play for the 2-game slate, because again, I think this could be a slate where we don't see 2 running backs get double digits. To be clear, I think probably some running back, it's much more likely than not that 2 running backs do score double digits. But I think P Ryan, if he just and you see like the Chiefs, they do random stuff all the time where just like, all right, let's just like throw it to P Ryan in the end zone. And I feel like a recent game this happened, like within the past 5 weeks or so. Maybe I'm misremembering, but so just like a receiving touchdown and then 2 carries and 1 more reception, and he scores 11 fantasy points, and that might be enough, especially at 4,200. So I do think that he is playable on the 2-game slate. Obviously, he's going to look better on the Showdown slate, but at 2% projected, am I reading that right? Do we have 2%? 2.34% projected ownership for P Ryan. I don't totally hate the play. Like, I think that's like, yeah, he could just randomly be the guy who scores a touchdown on the Chiefs, who love to just hand out random touchdowns.
Yeah,
I think it's playable.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. I did actually just check that looking at the Chiefs' last 3 full games, how their snaps sort of spread out while the team was trailing. Piran was only at a 20% snap share while trailing. Hunt was at 32%, Pacheco at 45%. So it does look like they want to give a bit more of a lean to Pacheco because of his receiving ability. But I mean, we know Piran will work in. And like you said, I mean, this team does love giving random guys touchdowns. So P. Ryan could just be the guy who falls into the end zone, like him, Noah Gray, even like a Justin Watson. You know, you can justifiably play all these guys on a 2-game slate for sure. I just don't know. I don't think I'm gonna get there on P. Ryan, but I certainly can't fault. I mean, you can justify just about anybody, and I certainly can't fault you for.
In a 150 set, like he's not somebody I would play in 20 lineups, but in a 150 set, I think he's worth playing some.
Yeah.
People were talking about it in chat earlier, like leaving $1,000 on the table. I haven't really played around with it that much, but are you planning on setting any kind of a salary cap?
I don't know if I'm going to set a max. I think I can probably be okay on most of my max salary lineups, just getting a little weird with construction, but I am kind of curious just scrolling through my teams how much some of these are leaving on the table. A few have about 900, 1,000 left. I might play around with these settings just to see what I end up getting. Most are pretty close to the salary cap, but I mean, even the teams that I'm looking at that are at like 49.2, 48.9 still look pretty viable. I think 1,000 on the table for this slate is fine. I'd probably cap it at 15, 16. You could maybe do a little bit more, but then you start getting into some really gross territory.
I think I'll probably set my salary cap. I think I will set a salary cap on this slate, and I don't always on these 2-game slates, but I think that there is enough randomness among cheap contrarian players on this slate that I'm willing to just like say, yep, I'm going to set it at 49,600 or 49,400, whatever, and just like hope that some random cheap guy is the guy you need. So I do think that I'm going to set a max salary on this slate. I don't know that I'm going to set it $1,000 off. I think it'll be a little bit higher than that. But I just looking at the salaries, I don't think that that's going to hurt you that much. So I have no issue with people doing that. Daniel's asked, Neil, you play on the RG Opto same as me. What are your position randomness percentage today if you don't? So I honestly just want my lineups to look. I want to have a lot of say in my lineups, but it kind of comes down to me to how much time I have. So if I have enough time to tinker with them, enough to get to like the exposures that I want and lineups look that I want, I don't set the randomness that high. I set it at like 5-10%, and then just kind of I still use it. I don't know if I even should at that point, but like I'll set it lower if I have the time to really tinker and get things exactly how I want. Whereas if I only have time to run like 2 or 3 sets and I'm not going to have the time to get them perfect, then I'll set it higher to like 20%. But I think like 5 to 10% is a good starting place. And then just, make sure after you run it, look at your lineup, see if they look the way you want, and then keep adjusting. But there's no like edge in adding more randomness. It's just a matter of, trying to get a group of lineups look the way that you want them to. So I would say probably go to 5 or 10% and play from there would be my suggestion. All right. So you like Brian Robinson the best of the Chiefs Commanders group. Do you like Kareem Hunt the second best? It sounds like because of the touchdown equity.
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, it's really tough with these guys. I do think you can justifiably play Pacheco. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if this week Pacheco got 4 out of 6 inside the 5 snaps. Something like that is certainly on the table. But yeah, I'd rather lean into Hunt. I think the role there's a little bit more secure. Our projections reflect that. But again, our projections on these guys are pretty pathetic. We have 8.1 for Hunt, 7.4 for Isaiah Pacheco. So not expecting much here. Fine with both. Prefer Hunt.
Okay. Yep. Same. I think same page there. I mean, because of the ownership, like you can make a case for Pacheco at 18.5%. I have no real issue with it, but it's not like he's 8%, like 18.5. He's still getting a fair amount of ownership. I don't think I'm going to let any of these running backs make or break my slate. I guess kind of what I'm coming down to is I'm probably not going to be too far off from the field on any of the expensive, like the higher end running backs that are getting exposure, except I imagine I'll be a little bit late on Saquon. I'll be a little bit heavier on Ray Davis, Ty Johnson. The tier that's like not getting any ownership is kind of the most interesting tier for me, and then just kind of hope for random stuff to happen and for the chalkier guys to not score much. So I think that I'll probably end up higher on some of these cheaper running back tier, and probably a little bit light on Saquon. I'm trying to think of when I actually build, what am I gonna want to do, and I think I probably will be a little bit higher on Pacheco than 18%, and just kind of hope that he is the guy that I think he's capable of getting those, like you said, like Kareem Hunt has been getting the high value touches more so than Pacheco, but I think Pacheco is still capable of it. Like the Chiefs are still kind of random, so I think I'll probably be higher than 18%. Pacheco, yeah, I don't know. With Eckler, like I wanted to really love Eckler here, but he's getting more ownership than B-Rob, so I think I'm with you. I think I actually like your order. I think B-Rob probably is the best of the group. I don't know. None of them stand out to me. I don't think this is where I'm getting all that different at running back ultimately. Other than I do think I'll be higher than 7% Ty Johnson. I think I'll be higher, maybe higher than 2% on Samaje Perine, probably pretty close there. I think I'll be higher than 7% on Ray Davis also.
Neil, I'm scrolling through my builds. I think the best way, I mean, some of these niche guys are solid ways to get different, but after fading Saquon, the best way to get different at running back, and I don't know that I'm going to do much of this, might just be playing 3 of these guys. Running back in the flex is not going to be used at all, based on what I'm getting in optos, because I mean, once you're down to your third favorite running back on this slate, you're looking at some really pathetic options. So I do think that's an interesting angle, because if I had to guess, I mean, on a normal slate, maybe 60% of lineups would have a running back in the flex, and on this slate, it might be 10%. It's going to be like nothing. I'm barely getting any of that.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And you're running Sims, right?
I am not this week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I'm just using like good old Fantasy Labs, which is what I used to build my lineups for years and years. And then I switched to Saber Sim for this regular season. And I didn't want to renew my Saber subscription for just like divisional or conference championship Super Bowl. I think we're going to be the only 2 weeks for it. And the only other sport I play is college basketball, and Saber doesn't give you much for college basketball. So it just didn't really suit my purposes. So I'm back to the old school. The Sims are in my head. Like this week. Yeah. Nice.
Love it. All right. Sounds good. That is interesting. Like, cause I'm keep on saying, like, I think it's possible that we don't even have 2 running backs score double digits, but like, a lot of the field is going to be playing at that. Like it is like none of them project all that well. People are going to want to take more shots on the other positions. So that is kind of interesting, playing a 3 running back build, because you can't feel that confident in any of them. But like, it's also not that unlikely that we have 3 running backs score double digits and all of the receivers suck, because we've seen like the best receivers on this slate are like AJ Brown and DeVonta Smith. And we've seen AJ Brown get 1 catch in a playoff game. Like we've seen them fail. So it's certainly possible that none of the receivers do anything. That's kind of interesting. All right, let's talk about the Bills also real quick. So James Cook getting 36% ownership, Ty Johnson 7%, Ray Davis 7%. Do you have any difference from the field in terms of these? And let me pull up the old game log here.
Yeah, so I'm about in line with James Cook. I certainly like him. I think the big note for Cook is that I wouldn't totally rule him out on teams with Josh Allen. I did set a decent dock there. I don't want a ton of James Cook on my teams with Josh Allen. I think, same team guys who are dependent on touchdowns, I'm generally reducing correlations there. We'll talk about tight end a little bit later, but I did the same thing for Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid because they're both very touchdown dependent tight ends. So that's something to think about with James Cook overall. I mean, I think he's a solid play. The frustrating thing is that he's never really going to be at more than 50% of backfield usage. I do very strongly prefer Ty Johnson to Ray Davis. I would be pretty surprised if they both came in around the same ownership. I believe that's what you read off on RG. Yep. I think Ty Johnson is a significantly better play just because, like I mentioned earlier, has a downfield receiving role, which is pretty valuable at running back. Pricing doesn't matter a ton, but at 4,400, a guy who can catch downfield passes will get a handful of carries. Not great touchdown equity, but we have seen him catch a touchdown pass in the playoffs. So I think if this game turns into a shootout or Kansas City gets a decent lead, Ty Johnson could be a pretty valuable sort of niche running back piece. Ray Davis is a guy that I'm not sure I'm going to get to, but we've seen him bust long touchdown runs. I'm curious if you could make like a stronger bull case for Ray Davis than I can, but I don't think I'm going to get to him this week.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I'll talk about Ray Davis, but I want to pull up, this is the fantasy points chart here for Josh Allen and James Cook. You can see where they score fantasy points. So did you say, are you excluding them together entirely, or just giving a little bit of a negative boost, or how
yeah,
because we do have some games here, like look at week 15, they both went off.
Yeah, so it's a minor doc. Like in a 150 set, I want some lineups where they are together because obviously that can't. Buffalo scores 5 touchdowns and Allen has 3 and Cook has 2, and obviously they're both in the winning lineup in most of those scenarios. But yeah, so what I did in Fantasy Labs, and I know this works a little different depending on the opto you use, but I applied about a 12% boost or 12% doc to James Cook, and then I applied like a 40% boost to Ty Johnson in my Josh Allen lineups. So significant boost to Ty Johnson, but that's largely because in a normal opto, you just won't get, we have Ty Johnson projected for 5.5 points right around there. So you're not going to get much Ty Johnson unless you do apply some significant boosts or make a little tweaks. So
gotcha.
That's probably my favorite way to play this Bills backfield this week, but I will still end up with some Josh Allen, James Cook teams as well.
Okay. So we between Ray Davis and Ty Johnson, if we look at the usage here, I have the game log. So last week, Ray, I was not expecting Ray Davis to play in that one after not practicing in concussion protocol. I forgot that it was the NFL playoffs, and concussions just heal faster in the NFL playoffs. So I was super in on Ty Johnson last week, and I feel okay about the usage, but he got 5 carries, probably would have gotten more if Ray Davis didn't get those 4. He ran 35% of routes, only saw 1 target on those, but then Ray Davis scored the touchdown. So I think that the case for Ray Davis is they used him at the goal line in just like a regular game script. There was nothing odd about it. They just they had the ball at the 1 or 2 yard line, and they just gave Ray Davis the ball. So I think that's the biggest bull case for Ray Davis is they will use him close to the goal line, which is obviously less valuable on the Bills, where also Josh Allen's there. He could just take it himself. What is that really worth, the goal line role? But I think that's the biggest case for Ray Davis is just he could have that. And then also, I think he probably has more contingent upside than Ty Johnson. If something happened to James Cook, I think Ray Davis probably is the more likely of the two to be the bell cow. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I would push back just slightly on the goal line role. Looking at week 17 wildcard divisional round, Ray Davis has only played 1 snap inside the 10-yard line over that stretch. James Cook is at 11. Ty Johnson is at 6. The fullback Reggie Gilliam is at 3. Ray Davis just happened to get a carry on that 1 snap. So I think Ty Johnson might have slightly better touchdown equity, but it also might be Ty Johnson's in at the 10. We're going to run Josh Allen QB power. We're going to let Josh Allen throw.
Yeah.
It doesn't really seem like they want Ty Johnson getting those goal line carries. So I definitely see where you're coming from, but I don't know. I really want to believe in Ty Johnson this week.
I'm with you that Ty Johnson is the better play of the two. Apologies to Andrew, who we did a best ball show last summer, and he was super in on Ray Davis, talked him up as a pass catcher and all this, and he got me to buy in, and he worked out okay as a best ball play. So apologies to Andrew, but I think I do prefer Ty Johnson to Ray Davis once again today, at least somewhat. Just look at the snaps here. We just last week 20 for Ty Johnson, 5 for Ray Davis. Maybe that was because he was coming back from the concussion, but I don't know. I think that Ty Johnson just has a better standalone role where he's way more involved in the passing game in general. You see in the conference championships 44% route share for Ty Johnson. Saw a couple targets, also had 9 carries to 1 for Ray Davis in that one. I guess Ray Davis got hurt early in that game. But regardless, I think Ty Johnson, the better play of the two, the one that I'd rather be higher over the field. And again, I think that his role becomes more valuable in a game that the Bills could be playing from behind against the Chiefs. Like just in these closer games, I think that those pass catching backs are worth a little bit more. So I like Ty Johnson quite a bit and again, we're getting about the same ownership, 7% for Ty Johnson, 7% for Ray Davis. There's only $100 difference in the price tag. So I do prefer Ty Johnson. I still think I'll probably get to 7% Ray Davis, but I think that I'll be higher than that on Ty Johnson. And then James Cook, sorry, I don't know if you said, but 36% ownership feels about fair to me on James Cook. Like he's probably he clearly is the second best in terms of projection. Like there's another gap after James Cook here, but he's also fairly expensive. I think the ownership looks about right on James Cook. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think pretty close to optimal for James Cook. I'm right around 40% myself.
Okay. Should we move on and talk about receivers?
Let's do it. A lot of interesting options on this slate for sure.
Yeah. So let's start with the Eagles because I think that they are the easiest. We can probably get through them pretty quickly. And they also, they don't project the best. Interesting. Looks like Terry McLaurin actually projects the best here. Well, let's start with the easier game and the earlier game. AJ Brown, 6,800 projecting for 43% ownership. DeVonta Smith, 5,800 projecting for 36% ownership. How are you feeling? And then we also have, I guess we can lump in Jahan Dotson. I don't know if there's any other Eagles receivers that you're thinking about playing on the 2-gamer. I don't think I'd play anybody else on the 2-gamer. But let's start with the top end and then Jahan Dotson if you want to. How are you feeling about the Eagles ownership here?
Yeah, I mean, I feel fine about the Eagles receivers. I think the toughest part is sort of what I laid out with Saquon Barkley. Washington, major run funnel. Philadelphia, we know, wants to run the ball about as much as possible. I mean, we've seen, in a few different games this year, Philadelphia's had like a service academy level pace where they're doing, 14 play drives that take up 11 minutes. Stuff like that just absolutely kills the upside of these pass catchers. That said, I think the best note for these guys, salary isn't really a worry at all. When DeVonta Smith costs the same as Khalil Shakir, that's a pretty easy play for me. I'd much rather play a guy like DeVonta Smith who has a downfield role, better chance of catching touchdowns. Same thing with AJ Brown. Like you really aren't giving up much. Him and Terry McLaurin are, the same price, and we have AJ Brown projected for about 2.5 points more than McLaurin right now. So I really like the fact that these guys are easy to fit into your lineups, and they're guys I'm going to have a decent amount of exposure to. But yeah, it's hard to make a great bull case when we know, Philadelphia, if this game goes in their way really at all, they're going to end up running the ball a lot. And we could see either Smith or AJ Brown just not get maybe completely scripted out, but pretty close to it. Right.
Yeah. And I don't think we need to say much more about the Eagles receivers. Like I think people kind of understand like who they are, like they've been their stars. Either one of them is capable of breaking the slate, being the player that you absolutely need. I guess I can pull up. I'll include the postseason here. Maybe I'll include just the postseason. We can look at the usage has not been amazing, but like clearly they are two of the better receiving options on the slate. They're both running. I mean, if we sort by, I'll sort by targets here. AJ Brown, 10 targets in the 2 games, so pretty light for his usual role, but he's usually better than that. 91% route participation, 91% for DeVonta Smith, just 8 targets. I don't know. They're two of the better receiving options. I don't want to waste that much time talking about the Eagles. Jahan Dotson, I guess let's just talk about him real quick. 1% projected ownership for Jahan Dotson at 3,400. Where does he rank for you among the like cheaper, low owned options?
He's fine. I really prefer these Bills guys. I'd rather take a shot on Amari Cooper than I would Jahan Dotson. I just think there's a much better chance Amari Cooper could, catch a long touchdown and actually give you something really strong here. Jahan Dotson's game logs are pretty terrible. He did score, 16 against the Giants, but that was a game where the starters weren't really playing. So yeah, I just don't see a ton of upside with Jahan Dotson. I think I'd rather take chances on like these Bills guys, on Olamide Zaccheaus. Yeah, I see a lot more upside elsewhere. I wouldn't fault you, especially if you're a bit more bullish than I am on Jalen Hurts. Like, part of my problem is I'm not playing much Hurts. If Hurts was going to be on 30% of my teams, I'd want a handful of those to have Jahan Dotson, I'd say.
Yeah. No, I think that is probably true. Like, I think the 1% ownership is probably fine. I don't rank him very highly among the cheap pass catchers, but at 1% ownership, like, I think that's about right for he probably has better than a 1% chance of being optimal. So maybe I like him. Maybe I'll have 3% Jahan Dotson, something like that. We got a question. Is there any chance where Saquon and AJ Brown both smashed in the same week? So I pulled up, these are their fantasy point charts, and looks like, yeah, I mean, week 1, 33 for Saquon, 23 for AJ Brown. Week 7, 27 for Saquon, 20 for Brown. Week 12, 46 for Saquon, 23 for Brown. So we do have some week 8, week 16. We have several examples of Saquon and AJ Brown smashing in the same weekend, and you don't really need them to smash on a 2-game slate either. Like, probably 15 or even lower than that for each would probably be enough on this slate. So yeah, I would not set a rule to not have them in the same lineup.
For sure. I would ask you, Neil, if I am playing Saquon and AJ Brown on the same team, instinctively, I think I'd want Jayden Daniels on that team a bit more than Jalen Hurts, especially because, a big Barkley game is generally negatively correlated with a monster Jalen Hurts game. And that probably means it's more of a shootout. Washington's really pushed to throw. Could probably go either way on it, but what do you think?
That's a really good question. I would probably let the Opto solve that question for me.
Hell yeah.
I don't know, because if AJ Brown's having a big game, it probably means that that Hurts is doing something, but also Jayden is cheaper, and it's going to be tough to fit both AJ Brown and Saquon Barkley. So I would guess that I think I probably end up with more Jayden Daniels in those lineups than. Oh no, wait, is Jalen Hurts cheaper? Am I wrong about that?
He is.
Yeah, so I think I would lean Hurts generally.
Okay.
In that scenario. But yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I don't know. That's Sims would be even better than just letting the Opto figure it. Just letting the Sims figure it out would be the better approach there. But yeah, I don't think that I would. I think if I were hand building, I'd be more inclined to have Hurts there and hope that Saquon's also scoring through the air. I don't know, but yeah, it's a fair question that I don't have a great answer to. All right, but let's continue on. So again, the Eagles, they look great. If you can fit AJ Brown, DeVonta Smith into your lineups, like, don't let the last 2 games scare you off of the Eagles. Even with the Commanders getting better defensively, like they've been really good against the pass defensively recently. So have most teams on the slate. So I think both AJ Brown, DeVonta Smith look like strong options. I think I probably end up a little bit light on AJ Brown just because of the price tag and because I'm gonna set a salary cap. And he's the most expensive receiver on the slate. Yeah. So I think I'll probably end up a little bit late on 43% AJ Brown, but I think I wouldn't let the last couple of games scare you off him. I think he is a totally fine play. DeVonta Smith, I probably end up over the field because he is $1,000 cheaper than AJ Brown and getting less ownership, and still has that huge play upside. So I do like DeVonta Smith a bit. Yeah, I think that's enough on Eagles receivers. Let's talk about Commanders. On the other side, so we have Terry McLaurin is the clear top receiver there, only getting 42% ownership. So that's kind of interesting. He's slightly, I guess he's similar to Brown. He's $100 cheaper and getting very slightly less ownership. Do you have a preference between Terry McLaurin and AJ Brown?
Yeah, I'd probably give a slight lean to McLaurin, but I mean, it does feel really, really close there. Also largely would depend on your quarterback. Obviously, if you're playing a little more Hurts, you'd probably prefer Brown. Feels like close to a toss-up to me. Our projections have it, like I said earlier, about 2.5 points in AJ Brown's favor. Yeah, I like McLaurin. I think one of the best angles that I've found on this slate in terms of the Washington wide receivers is like across the industry, Diami Brown is projecting better than Olamide Zaccheaus. And I do think that could be argued as a mistake here over their last 3 full games together. So not counting week 18, not counting last week when Zaccheaus got hurt. Zaccheaus has averaged 13.6 expected fantasy points per game compared to 11 expected fantasy points per game for Brown. It feels like, Zaccheaus was cleared. I believe he's dealing with a groin injury, if I remember correctly. I think someone mentioned that in chat. But he's fully cleared, should be in a full-time role here. I would imagine, maybe around a 70% route share. And I don't know if the team has a really strong preference between these two. So if there is a notable ownership gap, which at least when I was looking last night when I was making lineups, it looked like there was going to be one between Zaccheaus and Brown. Yeah, I'm seeing like 30% for Brown and 5 to 10 for Zaccheaus. Check a few other sites.
RG has it at 9% for Zaccheaus, 32% for Brown.
Oh yeah, okay. Zaccheaus is definitely the play to me if that's where ownership ends up falling, because I personally anticipate these guys to have fairly similar roles. I think easy to argue Brown's a more explosive player, but yeah, just looking at expected fantasy points per game, which is one of my favorite stats. Zaccheaus has looked really good in his last 3 fully healthy games. Like I said, 13.2 expected fantasy points per game. Yeah. What do you think there, Neil?
Yeah. I mean, it's trending wrong, right? So I'm pulling up the game log here, but I think I agree with you that Zaccheaus is going under owned. But it was 3 games ago, right, where he like had his big game, and it was like, oh, is he the guy? I think it was week 18 where he was suddenly looking like maybe he's taking over as the wide receiver 2 for the Commanders. So that's my one hesitation with it is, although like over the past 3 games, similar role, like in the most recent game, Zaccheaus 35% route participation to Diami Brown's. Oh, that's right. He concussion, right?
I believe it was something else, because I played a ton of Zaccheaus last week, and I remember being
that's right.
Okay, and seeing a 0 next to his name.
You're right. So in the conference championship, 50% for Zaccheaus and 55% for Brown. Yeah, no, I think that's a really strong call. That's a good note. I was looking at that earlier. Hip injury, and I'd forgotten that he got hurt in that game. No, I think that is really sharp. Zaccheaus does look like love that. Okay, so yeah, and Zaccheaus being projected for. Let's see here. We have Zaccheaus at 9.8 fantasy points. Diami Brown 9.4. That's interesting. So he actually projects better at RotoGrinders, Zaccheaus, than Diami Brown, but projects for much lower ownership.
They're the only site I've seen that has that.
Yeah, let's see. What is I believe fantasy points has Zaccheaus at 6.1, Diami Brown 9.6.
Yeah, that's a pretty big gap.
That's really interesting. I love that call. Zaccheaus looking like he's a little bit under owned there. I'm with you. So same page there. Any other Washington receivers we need to? So Terry McLaurin, clearly the wide receiver 1 on Washington. Just looking at, so this is just in the postseason 2 games. We have Diami Brown 60% route participation, 13 targets. Zaccheaus, we talked about. Jamison Crowder 2 targets on 17%. I think that's more of a showdown play. Same Luke McCaffrey, 17% route. I don't think we need to consider any other receivers here for the 2-gamer. All right, so then let's get to the real mess, which is the later game, where we have the Chiefs and the Bills. And I guess let's start with the Bills. So clearly we have Khalil Shakir is has the best role on the Bills in terms of he's going to run the most routes. He's 5,700, getting 39% ownership. One of my bigger stands last week was an anti-Shakir stand, but he does, looking at the game log in the playoffs. Let's pull it up here. Yeah. So if we sort by on the Bills targets, Khalil Shakir has 13. Nobody else has more than 5 on the Bills in the 2 playoff games. He's also run 62% of the routes. Nobody else has run more than 49%. He does have the best role on the Bills, but you said it earlier, he's not running he's not super likely to have any big splash plays. He gets there with eight receptions is the way that Khalil Shakir gets there. So 39% ownership. That actually seems better to me than last week when he was getting over 50% So 39% is like, okay, I guess I can accept that. Do you take any major issue with 39% to Shakir?
Not really. I'm closer to 25%. My big issue with Shakir is, obviously the target floor is strong. I think probably more justifiable in smaller fields. But you see it on the screen right now. Khalil Shakir's ADOT in the playoffs, 4.2. Ty Johnson's average depth of target, who's a running back, by the way, in the regular season is almost 8 yards downfield. So this is extreme, right? Like seeing a slot wide receiver with the average depth of target of almost a running back, means that his, floor's good, right? Because his catch rate's obscene. I mean, I haven't done projections in a couple weeks, but when I was helping Chris out during the regular season, like every week I'd look at Khalil Shakir's catch rate, and it's always at like 85 or 90% because he's getting, effectively screens, really, really short throws on every play. So yeah, I really can't fault, like if you're, not that I have any interest in playing cash on a slate like this, but if you are playing cash, a guy like Khalil Shakir makes a ton of sense because he's the only guy earning consistent targets. But when we're talking about, who could score 20, especially at maybe reduced ownership and help you win a tournament, I think pretty much all of these other Bills wide receivers are better options than Shakir. So I'll be a little underweight Shakir and I'll be overweight these other Bills pass catchers we can talk about here.
All right, let's get into those. I do want to thank you for the reminder. David says, come on, y'all. Handsome Neil deserves more likes. Yeah. I thought that's the right comment to bring up here anytime he's calling me Handsome Neil. But also a good reminder, I am trying to get to 5,000 subscribers on the channel by the Super Bowl. Looks like about a 0% chance of that happening at this rate. But if you could help me get a little bit closer to that goal by subscribing to the channel, I would appreciate it. Always love the support. And of course, like the video, as David says, commenting, all of that very helpful for the algo. Okay, so you already named some of the other Bills receivers that you like, but I'll read off some of the stats here for them because it is flat. We have Curtis Samuel, 5 targets so far in the 2 playoff games, 41.8% route participation. Matt Collins, 4 targets, 40% route participation. Amari Cooper, 4 targets, 40% route participation. Keon Coleman, 4 targets, 47.3% route participation. It is just a mess how flat it is. How do you decide? Who do you like the best of these receivers for the Bills, or is it just like taking an overweight stance on all of them? And I guess I should also, Jake, to before you answer this, I'll tell you the ownership is Matt Collins getting 8% ownership, Amari Cooper 6%, Keon Coleman 12.5%, Curtis Samuel 7.5%.
Yeah. So the way that I'm handling it is, generally prioritizing these guys who are seeing more downfield targets. That would be Amari Cooper, that would be Matt Collins, and that would be Keon Coleman. Coleman is playing the most, and I think generally has the best touchdown equity. So overall, he would probably be my favorite in that group. But I mean, you can justifiably play all of these guys. It really is just a dart throw, hoping Josh Allen can connect for a long touchdown or maybe multiple touchdowns with any of these players. And as someone who is playing a lot of Josh Allen, I feel pretty comfortable being relatively spread out among that group. So like the way I'm handling that in fantasy labs is I'm not applying any boost to Shakir. I don't think I'm going to dock him because, plenty of scenarios where Shakir, especially on a slate like this, gets you an okay enough score to be in the winning lineup. And then I'm boosting Samuel, Coleman, Amari Cooper, Hollins, and then the tight ends who we'll talk about a little bit later.
Samuel, Cooper. Wait, did you say Matt Collins also in that group? Are you boosting all of the? Okay, so just all of them.
Pretty much.
Coleman, I think I'm with you.
The way I would rank them is I would go Coleman, Cooper, and then pretty tough to decide between Matt Collins and Curtis Samuel. Samuel's earning a little bit better volume. Hollins obviously getting more downfield stuff. So they're closer to like a coin flip to me, but pretty clearly, I think in that order, Coleman, Cooper, and then like teardrop down to Hollins, Samuel.
I think I remain a sucker for Amari Cooper. Like I just can't help it. I'm like, he's been so good for so long. You look at his like yards per route run on the Bills. He's been very good on the Bills. Like, what is going on here? Why don't they just give him a full-time role? So I think I'm still inclined to go Cooper 1, probably Coleman 2 with you on that, and then I'll go Curtis Samuel over Matt Collins. But it's a gross group. Like I read off the stats, like nobody really separating. But I think Amari Cooper like just has that that upside of just like suddenly they're like, okay, we need him in this game. Let's lean on. I think he also had a good game the last time he played against the Chiefs with the Bills. I think he did well in that game or like had some long receptions. I don't know. I'm trying to make stuff up just to justify my take of like maybe they'll start using their good receiver here in a must-win game against a really tough opponent. So I do like, although they didn't last week in a similar situation against the Ravens, they didn't do it. So I'm kind of wish casting here, but I think Amari Cooper still has. JJT says he had 2 for 55. Yeah, so he had some nice receptions. I don't know. I'll lean on Amari of that group, but yeah, I think it's all pretty close. And then on the other side, we have another kind of gross situation with the Chiefs. They've only played one playoff game, but we got goose eggs out of Hollywood Brown and DeAndre Hopkins last week. It seemed like they're just leaning on Travis Kelce and Xavier Worthy. Actually, let me pull up is this route share? No, let me pull up the route share report. So there were some positive signs. Actually, no, I'm going to do it a different way. I'm going to pull up the game log and just include a little bit more than the playoffs for the Chiefs.
Can I read Matt Nagy's quote on
this? Yeah, do that.
Speak Index, because this is hilarious. So this is Chiefs offensive coordinator Matt Nagy on DeAndre Hopkins' low snap count last week. That wasn't intentional. Last week was a bit of a strange game, series-wise, play-wise, and rhythm-wise. DeAndre's been phenomenal. We know what he can bring and what he does bring to us. None of that was intentional. I don't know what that means. You're calling the plays, man. Maybe you should be a little more intentional with it. But that could also mean more playing time for DeAndre Hopkins. And that's sort of what I'm leaning into. I think my favorite angle for this slate is like no one seems to want to play D-Hop as I'm scrolling through projected ownership here. Seeing between 5 and 12% across the industry.
Yeah, let's see. RotoGrunners has it at 5%.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I definitely like that. Yep. Especially because I think, and the Chiefs don't do this a ton, but contested catch guys like Hopkins do tend to carry a bit better touchdown equity. Granted, the Chiefs are always doing weird stuff in the red zone, so I'm not sure that's something you can fully bank on. But if his route share goes from 45% to 65%, you're probably in a really good spot compared to the field if you just get a little ahead on DeAndre Hopkins. So I think that's my favorite angle with these Chiefs wide receivers. But, I mean, even Hollywood, probably going a bit under-owned. Considering that during the regular season, I mean, his targets per out run was insane. It was like 0.4, something like that. He was earning targets like an absolute maniac. And then last week's game, I'm kind of just willing to throw out a little bit, especially if the Chiefs offensive coordinator is saying we weren't being intentional with anything. It was a really weird game. Could just be weird coach speak, but also might mean they're going to try to be a little bit more pointed with their wide receiver usage.
Like I kind of buy what he's selling. Like I think it was just they couldn't get any kind of rhythm. They didn't run that many plays. They just didn't really get into doing what they wanted to do. So I have the same takeaway as you, which is I think they wanted to use DeAndre Hopkins more than they did. They also have that weird contract situation, which is, and I'm forgetting what it was now, is a snap share. Like DeAndre Hopkins has to be below 60%, or they give up a 4th rounder instead of a 5th rounder if they go to the Super Bowl. I don't know what it is exactly. But they have to like keep him under a certain level. So now and that's averaged. So like he was lower last week. They can use DeAndre Hopkins a little bit more this week. I think everything looks pretty good for D-Hop. I've also pulled up Marquise Brown's game log, and he had week 16, 8 targets on 33.3% route participation.
Yeah.
Week 17, 7 targets on 51.3. Last week I was super into Hollywood Brown because I was like, I think he's going to continue to see more routes. He ran 71% of the routes, only saw 2 targets. But again, that was just, I think, a really weird game. So I love both DeAndre Hopkins and Hollywood Brown, but Hollywood Brown projected to actually get a fair amount of ownership. You can see here the divisional round, who got the targets. It was 6 for Xavier Worthy, 8 for Travis Kelce, 3 for Noah Gray, and then nobody else more than Marquise Brown, 2, 0 for Watson, 0 for Hendershot. Just no, I guess Hopkins had 1, Juju had 1. But it just was one of those games that just feels like they weren't able to do what they wanted to do. Kind of gross. If they're able to run more plays here, I think we're going to see a little bit more usage for Hopkins, Brown, etc. So I'm with you. I think Hopkins at 5% looks great. I think, and not like, I don't want to be 30% DeAndre Hopkins, but maybe like 10 to 15%. I think seems good to me. Would you agree with that, or do you want to take an even more bullish stance?
No, that's pretty much exactly where I'm at. I'm looking at my current build is right around 15. So glad to hear we're in similar spots. Always feels good when, I'm just a regular fantasy analyst, but when I'm in a similar spot as a millionaire maker winner, that's a great feeling right there.
It's good for you to say that for me. Had a whole conversation with Davis how I don't talk about my success in DFS enough. And that's obviously the big
You're
one.
far too humble, Neil. You've been really good at this for a while, and you never bring it up. It's crazy. I'd be telling people all the time.
Well, I haven't been as good recently, so I think that's part of it. Well, once I start like winning a lot of money again, then I'll start talking about it more. Love this
Neil,
comment.
It's like being an Olympic gold medalist. You never lose.
You're always.
Yeah, it's with you forever.
You're right. Tubby says, "Good afternoon." I like this. Good afternoon, Neil and Jake. I feel like when one door closes, another opens. Come on, best ball in USFL. Yes, love it. Love to see it.
Let's go.
All right. So we love Hollywood is getting more ownership. I still think I'm going to be overweight because he's only 4,200 somehow.
Yeah.
And still like he's had 17 targets in limited routes in 3 games. So I think Hollywood looks awesome. Hopkins going to be over the field. Juju kind of interesting. Xavier Worthy, I guess 48.5%. I don't know. Feels fine, I guess. My guess is I come in a little bit light there just because I want to play some of the more contrarian cheaper pieces. But again, he was one of the Chiefs that actually saw targets last week. How do you feel about that number on Xavier?
Yeah, I'm pretty much right there with you. It does seem fine to me. I mean, we know he can be incredibly explosive. It's obviously very encouraging that he is earning those targets. But I mean, would anyone be shocked if he sort of disappeared this week and it was a lot more Hollywood, a lot more DeAndre Hopkins, even more Kelce? You could really see these Chiefs wide receivers playing out in a variety of ways. And obviously in a 150 set, that's something I'd want to be prepared for. So I was getting a ton of Xavier Worthy on my initial builds, and I'm limiting him now to probably around 40%, which I think is about right. Always a little scary with these, explosive guys who are projecting for decent ownership, but yeah, I don't really want to take a huge stand in either direction.
Yeah, I think my guess I'll be a little bit light on Xavier Worthy. I'll be certainly above the field on 37% Hollywood Brown, definitely above the field on DeAndre Hopkins. I think I'll probably be with the field to maybe a little bit above on 3% Juju also. I think he had enough of a role last week that let's see, Juju ran just 29% of the routes. That's actually less than I thought he was. I don't know. I'm not taking any kind of overweight stance there. I might even be underweight. I think that looks fine to me. All right. Anything else, or should we move on to tight ends?
Let's move on to tight ends, so we can talk some lineups here. We are not terribly far from kickoff, which is
we've got we've got some reminders that we still do have half an hour. I still have to make my lineups after the show too, so we're gonna try and get out of here in about 15 minutes. Give me 15 to build my lineups. Jake, I don't know if you still have to build your lineups also.
I have the shell pretty much set. I'm just sort of rerunning and tweaking slightly on the side here, but I feel pretty good about what I have. And I didn't submit a terrible dummy set, which I don't know if you have a rule for that, but I always try to get lineups in my dummy set that I would be okay with in case I got hospitalized or disappeared or whatever.
That's smart. Currently, I have all of my lineups reserved with no linebacks in there. So
no,
smart of you. Let's go quick. Let's go quick. Yeah. All right. So tight ends is a little bit easier in general. Travis Kelce, 45% ownership, projected for about 17 fantasy points. He is frankly too cheap for his role on the Chiefs. Kelce looks great. Any issue with 45%, or do you think you're going to be above that?
Not at all. Yeah, currently above that, more than fine with it. I mean, I think he's pretty clearly head and shoulders above these other tight end options here, even though he doesn't give you much after the catch anymore. Still gives you way more than a guy like Zach Ertz.
Yeah. So Kelce looks great. Noah Gray, while we're on the Chiefs, projected for 9.5% ownership at 3,000. Like I said, he did get 3 targets last week on somewhat limited route participation. 3 targets on 35.5% route participation. Seems okay at 3,000. I don't think I'll be taking much of an overweight stance there. But 9.5%, does that seem okay to you?
Yeah, it does. I'm wondering, I mean, there really isn't a huge difference to me between a Noah Gray and a Knox or even a Kincaid. So I do getting maybe not overweight on Gray, but I do 5 to 10%. I think makes a lot of sense there.
Yep. Same page there. Zach Ertz, as you mentioned, not much yak ability, but projected still for 11.6 fantasy points, about 17.5% ownership in a revenge game. How are we feeling about Zach Ertz?
I feel fine. I'm pretty bullish on Jayden Daniels, so I'd imagine I'll end up either right around ownership or maybe a little ahead on Ertz.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have a ton of great notes for him. I mean, we know the targets will be there, decent touchdown equity, but like I said, just gives you nothing after the catch. Not really an explosive threat, but then again, none of these tight ends really are, except for maybe Goddard, and even that feels like a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, I think Ertz looks good just from a we're not expecting really high scoring. You don't need that much, and he will have targets. Dallas Goedert, 4,500 projected for 21% ownership. So actually project for more ownership than Ertz, even though he's more expensive and projects worse. How are we feeling about Dallas Goedert?
I feel fine about Goddard. I think to me, Goddard is really just a function of how much Hurts do you want to play. And then you're obviously working Goddard into a decent chunk of those lineups. So pretty neutral on Goddard compared to these other guys. I think the most interesting is the team we're about to get to, the Bills.
Yep.
Yeah, unless you have anything to add on Goddard.
No, same page as you. Let's talk about Kincaid and Knox. Who do we like out of Kincaid and Knox? And I'm just going to pull up postseason only here.
So I mean, if you do look at postseason only, Dawson Knox ran more routes than Kincaid in the divisional round. Knox, same number of targets, slightly more expected fantasy points than Kincaid so far in the playoffs. This is something that projections don't really seem to be accounting for. Everyone's still suggesting, when you look around the industry, that Kincaid is the better play. I'm not really sure that I believe that. Right now, I have about 25% Knox and about 15% Kincaid, and that's a stand that I think I really like here. I don't see, obviously Kincaid is a bit of a better athlete, but in terms of usage, touchdown upside, chances these guys could score you 15 DraftKings points, I think I'd rather just lean into Knox here. I mean, you look at Kincaid's game logs, I don't think he has a game over 13.5 fantasy points all year.
Love it. So we're very much on the same page. This is one of my biggest stances on the slate is I'm going to be overweight on Dawson Knox in particular, up from 40.6% rep participation to 47.8 in the 2 playoff games. He has 5 targets in the 2 playoff games, which not a ton, but it's very flat across the Bills. Kincaid, rep participation down from 53.1% to 43.5%, also just 5 targets. So very, very similar roles, and yet Kincaid is more expensive. He's 3,600 to Dawson Knox 2,600. Kincaid getting 18.5% ownership to Dawson Knox 5%. They look very similar to me in terms of their usage opportunities. Seems like Josh Allen maybe trusts Dawson Knox a little bit more in the playoffs. So all things considered, loving Dawson Knox here as a contrarian play. Still not a really high confidence, but from a 5% ownership perspective, love me some Dawson Knox. And Kincaid still seems fine. He's cheap enough, not getting crazy high ownership, but Dawson Knox to me just looks better, like a better play overall. Okay, let's make a lineup for the main slate. Oh man, stuff is filling up. Am I gonna have to go into one that I've already reserved? No, here we go. All right, so where do we want to start with just one lineup? Is it Josh Allen?
Yeah, let's build a Josh Allen team.
Let's go Allen and Knox. And since we were just talking about how much we like him,
all right, love that.
So now we're already fairly contrarian by going Allen Knox. I think that's contrarian enough. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we can just jam in Barkley.
Yep, that was going to be my next suggestion. Just
Ty Johnson would probably be too much on this lineup, or no? What do you think here?
I think it'd be okay, but let's wait on that. Let's put in some of our favorite wide receivers.
Sure.
So yeah, we're already somewhat contrarian. Dawson Knox really our only super contrarian piece here. I would probably throw Hollywood Brown in there.
I like that.
We don't need to go one more Buffalo receiver, but I think we could if we wanted to throw in, if you want to go Coleman or Amari Cooper.
Yeah, let's do Coleman. So at running back, I threw in B-Rob, who I think could be pretty interesting in this build.
Yep, that works.
What do you think about Kelce in the flex?
Yeah, I think that makes Kelce just looks like one of the best values on the slate.
And then we can do whatever we want for our final wide receiver. We could go McLaurin. We could go DeVonta Smith, AJ Brown. I think even Shakir with this team would make some sense. Yeah. What do you think?
No Shakir. Gross.
Okay, hell yeah.
AJ Brown. Let's go AJ Brown.
All right. Nice.
We've got the salary, and now, I mean, we can play whoever we want. I kind of like the Chiefs better than the field does. They're going pretty underowned, but also we don't need to go that contrarian.
Well, I mean, that's something that like we didn't really talk about at all in this slate. You can absolutely play your defense against your stack, especially with, Josh Allen hasn't been as erratic as he was, say, 2 or 3 years ago. But, if Josh Allen throws a pick six, this game's really going to speed up, and that could really benefit the game environment. So that's another thing to look for when you are building your lineups, is sometimes, pick six can actually really help speed things up. And yeah, I really don't mind like Chiefs D against Josh Allen. I also, I definitely like the story this team kind of tells, which is, Buffalo, Kansas City shoots out, and then Philadelphia, Washington plays slower to the point that, both the running backs end up getting you there. And maybe AJ Brown just scores, say, 18 points, hits the bonus, doesn't score a touchdown, something like that.
I moved Kelce into the tight end and Knox into the flex just because I want to look at. So now we have 4,500 because we're leaving a lot of salary on the table here. So just want to show you what we're giving up here, and I'm okay with it. I don't see anybody else that like needs to be in here over that Dawson Knox can't outscore from this group. It's gonna he has to outscore Dallas Goedert, some other players, but we're already betting on that correlation, so I think I'm okay with that. But obviously you could upgrade elsewhere with this lineup. All right, let's go. And take a brief look at, or do you want to stick around for the showdown portion? You don't have to if you want to go make your lineups. I'm just going to take a really brief look at the showdowns. Totally up to you if you want to spend another 5-10 minutes.
I won't have a ton to add, but I can stick around. I haven't looked at a lot of these niche guys much, but I am really curious what you have to say for showdown. Yeah,
and all I'm going to do is look at the salaries, the ownership on the slates, and see if anybody stands out. So looking at captain first, 20.5% Saquon, no issue with that at all. I think just leaning into these high-end options makes a ton of sense at captain. No real issue. I'll say DeVonta Smith kind of stands out at 4% to me. I don't know if you can see the screen very well, Jake. 3% going to B-Rob. I know you liked him on the main slate. Probably makes some sense on the showdown slate.
Yeah, I mean, when I was looking at this showdown slate, it seems like the easiest way to get different is just play a captain that is not Saquon Barkley. Like anyone else is going to get you to a decent lineup construction.
True
in that regard. But yeah, I think B-Rob, DeVonta Smith, both really interesting captains. Even Goddard as a captain, I think is pretty interesting. But based on the RG ownership, DeVonta Smith would probably be my favorite of that group.
And I would add, since I usually talk about correlations with quarterbacks, obviously you don't need to correlate either of these quarterbacks. You don't need pass catchers with them. So I think it's totally fine to play either of them naked. But yeah, I think even Saquon, I don't have an issue at 20.5% ownership. But yeah, some good call outs there. I think flex is going to be pretty interesting here, because I think we're going to find, so you really liked Olamide Zaccheaus. He's getting 17.5% ownership here at 4,000. Looks like a pretty strong play to me. DeVonta Smith, again, 23%. He's 8,800, so a little bit more expensive. Here we have Austin Eckler is 6,400. B-Rob is 6,600. So I guess still they're about the same price. B-Rob just 21% ownership. Eckler 24%. I would imagine you like B-Rob better here also. But both look pretty good.
Yeah, I would be in agreement there. I think one of the interesting ways you could play this showdown slate is if you go either B-Rob or Jayden Daniels in the captain, and then you just put the other in the flex, you're probably getting every Washington touchdown in some capacity with a build like that. Obviously could argue the same for Jalen Hurts and Saquon, but you're just paying way more in salary to do something like that. It's harder to fit. Not
that expensive to get the Commanders. Yeah, that's a good call out. Seeing if anything else stands out here. Kickers. I mean, Zane Gonzalez 16% seems fine. Jake Elliott 20%. Here, I think you can consider Luke McCaffrey on the showdown slate, but still doesn't stand out as an awesome contrarian play. Just doesn't have that much of a role. Jahan Dotson getting sub 5% looks pretty good. I kind of like that for the showdown slate. 2,800. I like him a lot better for showdown than the main slate.
Yeah.
At sub 5% ownership. Kenny Gainwell, 8.5% ownership. It's mostly just contingent upside, but I think that's a solid number. Not as much standing out on the slate as I expected to. I'd say Oz is probably the best, like, relative to his salary and ownership. Looks like probably my favorite play of the group. I like that call out that you made on the main slate. I really like DeVonta Smith at 23%. Looks pretty good here. I actually like both B-Rob and Eckler here at their price tags. I think you can play them together, and that'll be kind of contrarian. So I'm gonna make one lineup here for that one, and I'll take your approach here, Jake, of putting those two in a lineup together. So here's the Showdown special. So I'm going to go Jayden captain, throw in B-Rob. Maybe I'll throw in Eckler too. Throw in Oz, just going full onslaught here. And then you have enough salary to throw in one of the expensive. I'm going to try Saquon and Commanders defense, Eagles defense, something like that. Or maybe one of the kickers. I guess it'd have to be Zane Gonzalez. Then you're using the full salary. I don't love that. Maybe I'll throw Jahan Dotson in there. There you go. Leaves 2,100 on the table. Looks like a fine large field GPP showdown option. All right, and then we'll take a brief look at the other showdown slate, which I think is going to be more interesting. We have at captain Josh Allen, 21%, Patrick Mahomes, 20.5%. I immediately think I don't like this number on Mahomes. I think I'll be light on Mahomes. Fine with that number on Josh Allen. But then you have any number of, like, James Cook at 6% looks really good to me. Hollywood Brown at sub 4% ownership looks really good to me. I think that you can really spread it out here. I think I'll eat the ownership on Allen, but otherwise, like, I'll be light on Mahomes. I'll probably actually eat it on Kelce also. But I think just, like, avoid the, like, really low end and kind of this mid-range. Hollywood looks especially awesome to me. Hollywood, James Cook, I think, are my favorites.
Yeah, those are the guys who really stood out to me as well on that.
Worthy at 8% looks pretty good.
Yeah, I think with James Cook especially, I mean, you could get, 3 touchdowns is certainly on the table, and getting a guy like that at what, 5% captain is generally pretty rare on these showdown slates.
Yeah, agreed. And then at flex, yeah, Mahomes 56%, Allen 53%. Hollywood Brown again 5,600, 26% ownership. I'll take an overweight stance there. Now we have Kincaid at 3,600, looks okay, but again, Dawson Knox just 1,600, only getting 11% ownership, really stands out to me. Ty Johnson looks really good at 11% ownership. DeAndre Hopkins, I mean, sub 11% ownership here at 6,200 looks pretty good. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I definitely feel pretty good about that. This is like shaping up. I hadn't looked at like salaries much for this slate in particular, but I think during the Washington game, I'm definitely going to spend some time on this showdown slate because ton of fun with these spread out offenses and the teams that you can build. I mean, makes it a bit frustrating for the 2-gamer, but for showdown, pretty great, right, Neil?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's a really fun showdown slate because there are so many options here.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of the same players we liked on the main slate. We like on the showdown slate here. Dion says Eagles defense in showdown rookie meltdown game. I don't hate that idea. I've tried it. I mean, Jayden Daniels feels like he's built different to me, but like, I still don't hate the idea. Ty Johnson, 3,400, 11% ownership again, looks great here. It really is just a lot of the same players that we liked on the main slate. I'm going to build one real quick and then get out of here to build my lineups. All right. So do we want to James Cook at captain?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. James Cook at captain. I think I want to throw Hollywood Brown in there right away for some salary relief. Do we want to go Dawson Knox?
You definitely can. I think probably want to load up on more. If we are going Dawson Knox, he'd probably be our only Bills pass catcher, right? Because I'd imagine we're either fading Allen or we're anticipating that he doesn't have a great game if Cook ends up as captain. So maybe Allen has a more okay game if we want him to end up in this lineup.
Sure.
Yeah, fine with Knox, but then I think you probably want to lean more into the Kansas City side. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't hate that idea. Would you want to go? I mean, Hopkins is 6,200. Maybe one of the kickers.
Sure. Why not? Why not Bills kicker?
Bass. Okay.
Bass.
And now we have 10,900 left over.
So you could
So now
probably
we
go
could
Mahomes
go.
and Kelce, right?
Oh,
Or
that's
we
true.
could
That'll
also
leave a
fit
lot
in
of.
Allen.
That leaves 2,800
Oh,
on the
okay. All
table.
right. So we probably are looking at Josh Allen for this team, which I think I'm sure is fine for Showdown.
I think it is
Uh,
fine. Like I don't totally hate that idea of playing Allen here. So now we have Allen
Yeah.
with Knox and Cook. Yeah, I think this looks good. I think this looks
Yeah.
like a
I
pretty
like that
solid
too.
Showdown lineup. All right. That's going to do it. Jake, really appreciate you hanging here. Really appreciate everybody else here as well. But Jake, I know the season's winding down, but what else do you have coming up? Where can people find you, etc.?
Yeah, so all of my work will be over at fantasypoints.com. I'm not sure how much NFL offseason stuff I'll be doing immediately here. Might be taking a little bit of time off as I get ready for spring football, but that'll definitely be my next big project here will be the UFL season. I believe it starts March 28th. Fantasy Points, we already have the package listed for spring football on the site, but we'll be doing player projections. We'll be doing content on ESPN props. I'll have notes in our Discord for every single Showdown slate that has a prize worth me talking about. And I'll also have weekly articles and a weekly show with my boy, Neil Orfield, which should be a ton of fun. I really thought we crushed it last year, had really fantastic projections. Me and Neil certainly both had some DFS success. We had plenty of subs who did really well in DFS or prop betting. UFL prop betting, by the way, is unbelievably soft. As a site, we had a 33% ROI. Yeah, our projections are just way better than whatever ESPN bet comes up with. So yeah, really, really excited for spring football. Great from an ROI perspective. If you're trying to get down 10K a slate, it's a little tricky. But if you're only getting a few $100 in each week and you want to have a great edge, I think fantasypoints.com for spring football is a great place to look. So definitely looking forward to that. And you can find me on Twitter if I do any NFL offseason content in the meantime. I'm sure I'll post it over there. But yeah, fantasypoints.com. Check out spring football. Get excited, guys. Football season not quite over. It'll start back up in about a month and a half after the Super Bowl. So yeah. What about you, Neil? What do you have coming up?
Yeah, I mean, this is it for this slate. I will, of course, do some stuff for the Super Bowl. I'll be doing NBA content in the Flannelverse a bit going forward as well, so you can find my stuff there. I'm, of course, at PlayerQ DFS on the socials. All right, I got to get out of here and make my lineup. So make sure you go follow Jake at Jake Tribbey. Come check us out. We really did. We had a lot of fun doing and a lot of success in UFL last year. We're going to do it again this year. So come check us out at Fantasy Points in a couple months. But again, we'll be doing some Super Bowl content. All right. Got to get out of here. Got to go make some lineups. Thank you all very much for hanging out with us. Let's win some money tonight. Today. Good luck, everybody. And let me know if you do win. And of course, join the Flannelverse Discord, link in the description if you're interested. All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Jake. Catch you later.